Part 1. Introduction. In the Mountain is You. Brianna Wiest introduces a powerful idea. Most of the obstacles that feel external in our lives are, in fact, internal. The mountain is not a single problem or circumstance, but the accumulated weight of unresolved emotions, unconscious patterns, and self-sabotaging behaviors that block us from becoming who we are capable of being. Wiest reframes adversity not as punishment, but as an invitation to transformation. Drawing inspiration from nature, the author explains that growth is rarely comfortable. Just as forest fires are essential for ecological renewal, clearing old growth to allow new life to emerge, human beings undergo periods of psychological breakdown that are necessary for personal evolution. These moments, which feel like hitting rock bottom, are often the precise points at which real change becomes possible. What we interpret as failure is frequently the beginning of a deeper awakening. Wiest uses the metaphor of a mountain to describe the internal conflict between our conscious desires and our unconscious fears. On one hand, we know what we want: success, peace, connection, purpose. On the other hand, unseen beliefs, past wounds, and learned coping mechanisms quietly work against us. The mountain forms where these opposing forces collide, creating tension that demands resolution. Avoiding the climb only prolongs suffering. Facing it is the only path forward. A key theme in the introduction is that having a mountain does not mean something is wrong with us. Imperfection is not a flaw. It is the condition that allows growth to exist at all. Just as the universe itself is shaped by breaks, gaps, and collisions, human potential is unlocked through confronting discomfort rather than escaping it. Chronic struggles, Wiest explains, are rarely about circumstances alone. They are signals pointing inward, asking us to address what has been ignored or suppressed over time. The author also clarifies that self-sabotage is not rooted in laziness or weakness. It is often the result of outdated survival strategies that once protected us but no longer serve who we are becoming. These patterns persist until life presents us with no choice but to change. At this breaking point, the base of the mountain, we are given an opportunity. Either repeat the past or consciously choose reinvention. The introduction concludes with a profound assertion: the mountain before us is not an enemy, but a calling. It marks the threshold between the life we have been living and the life we are meant to live. Mastery, Wiest insists, is never about conquering the mountain itself. It is about mastering the self that must climb it. Transformation is inevitable when we are willing to face ourselves honestly and step into the person we are meant to become. Part 2. Understanding self-sabotage and the inner conflict. In the next section of The Mountain is You, Brianna Wiest dives deeper into the concept of self-sabotage, reframing it not as self-destruction, but as misdirected self-protection. At its core, self-sabotage is the result of internal systems that were once designed to keep us safe. These systems persist long after the original threat has passed, quietly influencing our decisions, behaviors, and emotional reactions. Wiest explains that the human mind is shaped primarily by survival, not happiness. Much of what we do unconsciously is aimed at maintaining familiarity, even when that familiarity is painful. This is why people often remain stuck in cycles of unhealthy relationships, procrastination, addiction, self-doubt, or fear. The known, even if harmful, feels safer than the unknown. Change threatens identity, and the ego resists anything that challenges its existing structure. A central idea introduced here is the split between the conscious and unconscious self. Consciously, we want growth, success, and fulfillment. Unconsciously, we fear loss, rejection, and emotional pain. When these two forces are misaligned, the unconscious mind often wins. not because it is stronger, but because it operates automatically. This internal contradiction becomes the mountain we repeatedly face, wanting change while simultaneously resisting it. Wiest emphasizes that self-sabotage is rarely loud or obvious. It often appears subtle: missed opportunities, delayed action, emotional withdrawal, overthinking, or settling for less than what we desire. These behaviors allow us to avoid the discomfort of growth while convincing ourselves that circumstances are to blame. Over time, these small acts compound, creating patterns that feel impossible to break. Another crucial insight in this section is the role of emotional wounds and unprocessed experiences. Wiest suggests that unresolved trauma, whether from childhood, relationships, or repeated disappointments, becomes embedded in our nervous system. Rather than being consciously remembered, these experiences shape how we respond to stress, intimacy, success, and failure. Self-sabotage emerges as a coping mechanism, a way to avoid triggering old pain. The author also challenges the common belief that motivation alone is enough to change behavior. True transformation does not come from forcing discipline or positive thinking. It comes from understanding why resistance exists in the first place. When we fail to address the emotional root of our actions, willpower becomes a temporary fix rather than a lasting solution. Sustainable change requires emotional awareness, self-honesty, and compassion. Wiest introduces the idea that chronic problems are not random. If an issue keeps recurring, whether financial instability, relationship conflict, or self-esteem struggles, it is likely pointing to an internal imbalance rather than an external failure. These patterns are messages, not mistakes. They reveal where healing, integration, and conscious choice are needed most. Importantly, the author reframes accountability in a non-judgmental way. Taking responsibility does not mean blaming ourselves for past behavior. It means recognizing our power to respond differently going forward. Awareness is the first step toward mastery. When we observe our patterns without shame, we create space to interrupt them. This section lays the psychological foundation for the rest of the book. Wiest makes it clear that climbing the mountain begins with understanding why we keep building it. Self-sabotage is not an enemy to defeat, but a signal to interpret. By learning to listen to these signals rather than fight them, we begin the process of transforming internal resistance into self-trust and alignment. Part 3. Emotional awareness, healing, and rewiring the self. In this section of The Mountain Is You, Brianna Wiest shifts the focus from identifying self-sabotage to understanding the emotional mechanics that sustain it. She emphasizes that lasting change does not come from suppressing emotions, but from learning how to process and integrate them. Emotional awareness, according to Wiest, is the bridge between unconscious behavior and conscious self-mastery. Wiest explains that many people are not struggling because they feel too much, but because they have never learned how to feel properly. Emotions that are ignored, avoided, or judged do not disappear. They resurface as anxiety, reactivity, numbness, or destructive habits. The body keeps a record of what the mind tries to forget. This is why healing is not merely intellectual. It is deeply physiological and emotional. A key idea introduced here is that emotions are signals, not problems. Fear, sadness, anger, and discomfort exist to communicate unmet needs or unresolved experiences. When we interpret these feelings as flaws or weaknesses, we resist them. Resistance, however, intensifies suffering. Wiest suggests that when emotions are met with curiosity rather than judgment, they naturally move through us instead of becoming stuck patterns. The author also discusses emotional regulation as a foundational skill for transformation. Regulation does not mean controlling emotions or forcing positivity. It means building the capacity to stay present with discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. This capacity allows us to pause instead of reacting automatically. In that pause, choice becomes possible. Without emotional regulation, self-sabotage remains reflexive and repetitive. Wiest highlights how identity is often constructed around emotional experiences. Many people unconsciously define themselves by their pain, past failures, or coping strategies. Over time, these identities become familiar and even comforting, despite being limiting. Healing requires questioning who we believe we are and whether that identity still serves our growth. Letting go of an old self can feel like loss, even when it is necessary for evolution. Another critical theme in this part is the distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is an inevitable part of growth. Suffering is what happens when pain is resisted or prolonged through avoidance. Wiest argues that growth often requires short-term discomfort in exchange for long-term freedom. The willingness to experience emotional discomfort consciously is what separates transformation from stagnation. The author also introduces the idea of emotional maturity. Emotional maturity is not about never being triggered, but about recognizing triggers as invitations for healing. When we are emotionally mature, we stop projecting unresolved emotions onto people or situations and instead take responsibility for understanding our internal responses. This shift marks a major step towards self-mastery. Wiest emphasizes that healing is non-linear. Progress does not follow a straight line, and setbacks are not signs of failure. They are part of the integration process. The goal is not perfection, but increased self-awareness and resilience. Each time we respond differently to an old pattern, we weaken its hold over us. This section reinforces that climbing the mountain is an internal process of learning how to sit with discomfort, rewrite emotional responses, and release identities that no longer align with who we are becoming. Emotional awareness is not a destination. It is a daily practice that gradually transforms self-sabotage into self-trust. By mastering emotional presence, we begin to reclaim agency over our lives. The mountain does not disappear, but we become stronger, steadier, and more capable of navigating it with clarity and intention. Part 4. Rebuilding self-trust, discipline, and aligned action. In Part 4 of The Mountain Is You, Brianna Wiest moves from inner awareness to outward transformation. After emotional healing and self-understanding come clarity and responsibility, the phase where insight must translate into action. Wiest makes it clear: awareness without change is comfort disguised as growth. True self-mastery requires rebuilding self-trust through consistent, aligned behavior. A central theme in this section is self-trust. Wiest explains that many people struggle not because they lack discipline, but because they no longer trust themselves. Broken promises, small or large, erode confidence over time. Each time we say we will act and do not, we reinforce the belief that we are unreliable. Rebuilding self-trust does not require dramatic transformations. It requires keeping small, realistic commitments consistently. Discipline, in Wiest's framing, is not punishment or rigidity. It is self-respect in motion. True discipline is choosing what aligns with your future self rather than what soothes your present discomfort. This reframing removes shame from discipline and positions it as an act of care. When actions are rooted in clarity rather than fear, they become sustainable rather than exhausting. Wiest emphasizes that aligned action comes from identity, not force. People fail to maintain habits when those habits conflict with how they see themselves. Lasting change happens when behavior matches identity. Instead of asking, "How do I stay motivated?" Wiest suggests asking, "Who am I becoming through this choice?" When actions reinforce identity, consistency follows naturally. Another important insight in this section is the role of delayed gratification. Wiest explains that emotional avoidance often drives impulsive decisions, seeking comfort, validation, or escape. Growth requires the ability to tolerate temporary discomfort in service of long-term fulfillment. This is not about deprivation, but about discernment, choosing what nourishes rather than numbs. The author also addresses fear of success, an often overlooked form of self-sabotage. Success brings visibility, responsibility, and change, things that threaten familiar identities. Subconsciously, people may resist progress to avoid outgrowing relationships, expectations, or versions of themselves. Recognizing this fear allows individuals to move forward consciously rather than unconsciously retreat. Wiest highlights the importance of structure as support, not restriction. Routines, boundaries, and systems reduce decision fatigue and protect energy. When life lacks structure, emotions dictate behavior. Structure creates safety for growth by allowing action to occur even when motivation fluctuates. Freedom, Wiest argues, is not the absence of structure, it is the result of intentional structure. A powerful idea introduced here is that confidence is a byproduct, not a prerequisite. Many people wait to feel ready before acting. Wiest reverses this logic. Action creates confidence. Each aligned choice strengthens the internal belief that change is possible. Momentum is built through movement, not contemplation. This section reinforces that transformation is earned through repetition. Insight opens the door, but practice walks the path. Self-mastery is not about dramatic breakthroughs, it is about daily integrity. Every small aligned action chips away at the mountain until progress becomes inevitable. By the end of Part 4, Wiest makes it clear that the climb becomes easier, not because the mountain shrinks, but because the climber becomes stronger. Self-trust, discipline, and aligned action turn awareness into embodiment, and intention into reality. Part 5. Surrender, letting go, and learning to flow with life. In Part 5 of The Mountain Is You, Brianna Wiest introduces a paradox that lies at the heart of true transformation. Real power is found not in control, but in surrender. After rebuilding self-trust and learning aligned action, the next phase of growth requires releasing the illusion that we can force life to unfold according to our will. Surrender, Wiest clarifies, is not giving up. It is giving in to truth. Wiest explains that much of human suffering comes from resisting what is already happening. When reality conflicts with expectations, the instinctive response is control. Overthinking, micromanaging, numbing emotions, or forcing outcomes. These behaviors may provide temporary relief, but they disconnect us from intuition and exhaust emotional energy. Surrender begins when we stop asking, "How do I fix this?" and instead ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" A key insight in this section is the distinction between effort and force. Effort is intentional, grounded, and aligned with values. Force is driven by fear, urgency, and the need to prove something. Wiest argues that when actions come from fear, fear of failure, abandonment, or inadequacy, they create resistance rather than progress. Surrender allows effort to remain while releasing force. The author also explores emotional attachment as a source of stagnation. People often cling to identities, timelines, relationships, or versions of success that no longer align with who they are becoming. Letting go can feel destabilizing because attachment provides a sense of certainty. Yet Wiest emphasizes that clinging to what is familiar often prevents what is meant for us from arriving. Growth requires loosening our grip. Another powerful theme in this section is trust in timing. Wiest challenges the belief that urgency equals importance. Many people rush healing, goals, or transformation because they fear falling behind. This urgency creates anxiety rather than clarity. Surrendering to timing does not mean passivity. It means acting when clarity is present instead of panicking in uncertainty. When actions are rushed, they are often misaligned. Wiest also reframes failure through the lens of surrender. What feels like failure is often redirection. Life removes what cannot go with us to the next version of ourselves. When we resist this process, pain intensifies. When we allow it, loss becomes liberation. Surrender transforms endings into initiations rather than defeats. The author discusses how intuition becomes accessible only when mental noise quiets. Overthinking drowns out inner guidance. Surrender creates space. Space to feel, listen, and respond rather than react. In this state, decisions feel calmer, clearer, and more grounded. Intuition is not mystical. It is the accumulated wisdom of lived experience speaking beneath fear. Wiest emphasizes that surrender is an ongoing practice, not a one-time act. Each stage of growth requires releasing something: an outdated belief, a coping mechanism, a version of control. The mountain does not demand domination, it demands humility. The climber must learn when to push forward and when to rest, when to act and when to allow. By the end of Part 5, it becomes clear that surrender is not the opposite of self-mastery. It is its completion. Mastery is knowing when to act and when to release, when to hold steady and when to let go. When we stop fighting ourselves and reality, life begins to meet us halfway. The mountain remains, but it no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes a guide, shaping us not through resistance, but through cooperation with who we are meant to become. Part 6. Integration, Becoming the Future Self, and Embodied Transformation. In Part 6 of The Mountain Is You, Brianna Wiest brings together all the inner work discussed so far and focuses on integration, the process of living as the person you have been becoming. This stage is not about learning new concepts, but about embodiment. Transformation is complete only when insight, emotion, and action align consistently in daily life. Wiest explains that many people intellectually understand their patterns but continue to repeat them because change has not yet been integrated into identity. Integration means that growth no longer feels forced or performative. It becomes natural. The future self is not created through sudden reinvention, but through repeated choices that reinforce a new way of being. Who you are becoming is shaped by what you practice every day. A key idea here is that the future self already exists as potential. Becoming that version of yourself is not about adding something new, but about removing what is misaligned. Old fears, beliefs, coping mechanisms, and emotional attachments must be released to make space for the person you are meant to be. Growth, Wiest argues, is a process of subtraction more than accumulation. The author emphasizes the importance of consistency over intensity. Dramatic moments of motivation often fade, but small repeated actions compound into lasting transformation. This applies not only to habits, but also to emotional responses, boundaries, and self-talk. Each time you respond differently to an old trigger, you strengthen the new identity and weaken the old pattern. Wiest also explores how integration requires emotional honesty. Becoming the future self does not mean never feeling fear, doubt, or discomfort again. It means responding to those emotions with awareness rather than avoidance. Emotional resilience is built when we allow feelings to arise without letting them dictate our behavior. The future self is not fearless, just emotionally grounded. Another powerful theme in this section is self-leadership. Wiest explains that many people wait for external validation, permission, or certainty before fully stepping into their lives. Integration requires internal authority. the ability to guide oneself without needing constant reassurance. Self-leadership means acting in alignment with values even when no one is watching and outcomes are uncertain. The author highlights that integration often brings a sense of calm rather than excitement. Early stages of growth can feel dramatic and emotionally charged, but embodied transformation feels steady and grounded. Peace replaces urgency. Clarity replaces chaos. This calm is not stagnation, it is alignment. Life begins to feel simpler because decisions are no longer constantly negotiated internally. Wiest also addresses the fear that can arise when change becomes real. As the future self takes shape, old relationships, environments, or habits may fall away naturally. This can feel isolating at first. Integration requires trusting that what aligns will remain and what does not will fade. Outgrowing parts of life is not betrayal. It is evolution. By this stage, the mountain has fundamentally changed its role. It is no longer an obstacle to overcome, but a structure that shaped strength, awareness, and self-trust. The climb has built capacity, not just achievement. The individual who emerges is not defined by what they conquered, but by who they became in the process. Part 6 makes it clear that transformation is not an event. It is a way of living. Integration is the moment when healing, discipline, surrender, and awareness converge into a stable sense of self. The future self is no longer ahead of you. It is who you are now choosing to be. Part 7. Conclusion. Mastering the self, not the mountain. In the conclusion of The Mountain is You, Brianna Wiest brings the reader back to the core truth that underpins the entire book. The mountain was never meant to be conquered. It was meant to transform us. What once appeared as an obstacle was, in reality, a calling. The struggles, patterns, and inner resistance we face are not signs of failure, but signals guiding us towards self-mastery. Wiest reiterates that the mountain represents the internal block between who we are and who we are capable of becoming. This block is formed through years of unconscious habits, emotional wounds, survival mechanisms, and beliefs adopted without choice. The journey of climbing the mountain is the process of bringing these unconscious patterns into awareness and choosing to respond differently. Freedom, she emphasizes, is not found by avoiding discomfort, but by moving directly through it. A central message of the conclusion is that transformation is irreversible once it is embodied. When we genuinely change, emotionally, mentally, and behaviorally, we cannot return to who we once were. This can feel unsettling, but it is also deeply empowering. Growth demands the willingness to grieve old identities, outdated versions of the self that once served a purpose but can no longer support the life we are meant to live. Wiest highlights that becoming the future self is not about perfection or control. It is about integrity, presence, and self-understanding. The person who emerges on the other side of the mountain is not someone who has eliminated fear, pain, or uncertainty, but someone who knows how to meet these experiences with resilience and clarity. Strength is no longer reactive. It is grounded. The conclusion also reinforces the idea that meaning is created through challenge. Without resistance, there is no expansion. Without internal conflict, there is no self-awareness. The mountain shapes character by demanding patience, humility, and courage. Every step of the climb builds emotional intelligence and inner authority. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable because the climber has grown. Wiest reminds the reader that life will continue to present new mountains. Mastery is not about reaching a final destination where struggle disappears. It is about developing the capacity to meet each challenge with wisdom rather than fear. Once we learn how to climb, we are no longer threatened by the terrain ahead. The book closes with a powerful realization. The mountain behind you will one day fade, but who you became while climbing it will remain forever. Your struggles have not been detours. They have been the path. The work of your life is not to dominate circumstances, but to understand yourself deeply enough to move through life with intention, trust, and inner peace. In the end, as Wiest makes clear, the greatest victory is not reaching the summit. It is becoming the person capable of standing there.